Hello and welcome to Willow's Green Permaculture. My name is Stephen Dixon, and today I'd like to talk to you about growing all our food surrounded by all sorts of native animals that are often foragers and very often considered pests, and why we like to see those animals around, why we don't mind it when they eat some of our food, and why, in fact, it's a good thing to see all of those animals, all those birds, all those insects, all those frogs, toads, etc. around our garden. I'm going to talk to you about why it's good to see them around, how they interact with everything that we grow, and what we do to maximize our harvests. I'm going to give you different strategies to make it so that it's just a little bit more difficult for those animals to forage in your gardens. Also, what we do to make our ecosystem healthier. What you're going to get is better food that's healthier for you. So if this is something you're interested in, then let's get started. I've got a whole bunch of notes here in nice big letters because I don't have my glasses on me, because I have a lot to say and I don't want to forget. You know, this morning, my older brother Sean, I'm one of 9 children, by the way, and my brother Sean, who's a playwright and a musician, he wrote on his Facebook page, apparently radishes are no longer spicy because apparently something about their growing conditions. And so I posted, and on his page I gave an answer saying, well, you know what, the reasons are a lot more specific. You know, plants, food spiciness is often its defense mechanism. It's also sometimes a way of communicating with other plants. And usually in interactions with other species, other plants, other animals, insects, and so on. And often that's what a plant's spiciness is. It's defense mechanism against insects. So if you're using pesticides or fertilizers and you're making it so a plant can grow because you're getting rid of all those pests, etc., well, or you're using stuff that's going to chemically interact with the plant, then either it's not going to develop that spiciness or all those different flavors because it's not going to need those defenses. It's basically going to become lazy. Essentially, just like humans, all living things need stimulation in order to develop all the faculties that we have, whether that's spiciness in plants, whether that's creativity in humans, or even our immune system. So I'm going to be getting into all of that today, what it is, why it is that it's important to have a healthy, biodiverse ecosystem surrounding our gardens, and what we do to maximize our harvests with that biodiversity that is all around and how it helps. So, first thing I'd like to say, we got a bunch of gardens, but we have a main one, which is about 400 square meters, about a tenth of an acre in size. That's our main garden where we grow basically 80% of our food. That garden in particular, we've got it surrounded by a 4-foot fence. Now, a 4-foot fence doesn't keep much out. However, it's buried a foot under the ground, so it's actually a 5-foot fencing roll that we used buckthorn branches and as our posts. We buried the fence a foot below ground. It's 4 feet above the ground. So what it does is it keeps the rabbits out. It doesn't keep much else out, but rabbits are probably one of the most destructive animals when it comes to gardens. And so the 4-foot fence keeps the rabbits out, which is really nice. We initially, back in 2020, put in a deer fence, which was 7 feet high, and it was made of a mesh, but all kinds of animals would get caught in it all the time, and we'd get caught in it too. But what really bugged me was when I'd see squirrels and chipmunks and birds caught in that fence and basically killed by it. And the straw that broke the camel's back was when there was a northern water snake stuck in the fence. It was stuck, totally stuck, couldn't get out, was still alive, and it was being attacked by birds, I guess. And I decided to save it. So while I was trying to unravel it from the fence, I said, okay, my friend, you don't bite me while I'm trying to get you out of this fence. And I managed to get the snake out, and I left it there after I got it out of the fence. It was pretty exhausted. When I came back half an hour later, it wasn't there anymore. I'm hoping that it managed to go away and it wasn't picked up by something else, but it was alive when I got it out of the fence. So we got rid of that deer fence, even though that deer fence basically kept everything out of the garden. But the thing is, that deer fence didn't only keep all the animals out of the garden, and it kept all of them out, including deer. It also kept the important animals out of the garden that we needed. For example, birds. The birds would get caught in the fence, so they stopped coming. It also kept frogs and toads out of the garden, which was a real problem because we had surrounded the garden with logs and with a rain garden beside it to attract those frogs and toads, but they weren't able to get in because of that deer fence, because obviously we didn't want anything getting underneath it either, so it was buried as well. You see, so we got rid of that deer fence and we put up the 4-foot fence, but pretty well everything can get into the garden except for rabbits, but we wanted to make it more difficult. So what we did was, and this is something we did right from the start, just outside of the fence, there's about a 3-foot wide garden surrounding the garden. A 3-foot wide, what I like to call it, it's a contour, even though contour is used in different ways, but I call it a contour because it surrounds the garden. And we planted all sorts of stuff into that contour, like thorny bushes, raspberries, wild rose, and also and even thorny flowers, like you wouldn't think coneflower is thorny, but those seed heads are thorny. Anyway, all sorts of plants that basically keep deer and stuff like that away because they just don't like it, and other insects and pests and so on because they don't like it. We've got aromatic herbs there, things like thyme, lavender, sage, yarrow. And now the deer don't like the yarrow, they don't like coneflower. And so we've got all those in there. And then we have things like rose and raspberry, which are very thorny. So they help keep the animals out. And we planted thickly. So we're talking it's 3 feet wide. It's very thick. And in some parts goes 7 feet tall. So that's what helps keep the deer out. Because if the deer can't see the other side, they're not going to jump over. Something else we did is we strung a line. Initially it was a fishing line, but we removed that. After we removed the deer fence, above the 4-foot fence, we put a line 6 feet up surrounding the garden. Like I said, it was initially a fishing line, but we removed that because it's not good for the environment. When it breaks and so on, it gets into the environment. Things can get tangled up in it. Basically, the line now is the same material as what's inside the fence, which is a thick sort of metallic material, and it's 6 feet up all around the garden. And it basically, if there are areas where the deer aren't blocked by plants and so on, they see that fence that's 4 feet high that they could jump over quite easily, but they see that line and it makes them hesitate. So these are some strategies. And also what's planted in that contour is not only aromatic herbs and thorny bushes and so on, but also there's also fruit in there. So if sort of wild native fruit that the local native animals like, so if they prefer to eat that rather than go into the garden, then that's great too. They'll stop at the contour. They'll see, oh, this is a bit difficult for me to get in. They don't jump in, and they can eat there if they're not repelled by the aromatic herbs, the yarrow, and the coneflower, for example, that the deer don't like. Now, but the thing is, that's just our main garden. We have all sorts of other smaller gardens that we've used for experimentation all over the place. Small gardens that are maybe, I don't know, maybe 50 square feet each or 100 square feet each. Not very big. We have our curve garden, we have our peace garden, our compost garden, our chinampa garden, our lavender garden, our boat garden, our fence garden, our sorghum and millet garden. We have all sorts. None of those are surrounded by anything, and they're doing just fine. So how do we do that? Well, I'll get to that in a minute. First, the first thing I want to say is we're not only trying to keep animals out of the garden. Like I said earlier about the deer fence, we also want certain animals to go into the garden, specifically frogs, toads, obviously pollinators. We want birds going into the garden too, because the frogs, the toads, and even small snakes like garter snakes and so on, and birds, they're going to help us control the insects. They're not the only things that help us. I'll get to other things that help us control the insects later in nature. But the frogs, the toads, the birds, and the snakes are big, huge helpers of controlling slugs and insect foragers. So how do we attract them to the garden? First of all, we had a lot of dead trees here when we first moved in, so we cut some of them down. We cut the logs up so we could move them, and we surrounded the garden. That garden, sort of those 3 feet I talked about. Well, on either side of those 3 feet surrounding the garden is our logs. So one sort of one contour of logs, and then the garden where we planted all that stuff in, the 3 feet, and then another set of logs all the way around. What do those logs do? Lots of stuff. They attract frogs and toads because they give them shelter close to the garden, and snakes too. And they also attract things like solitary bees and other native insects who use them as shelter. The solitary bees will drill into them and make their nests there. Those are very, very important pollinators. They pollinate a lot more than, let's say, even other types of bees and so on. So they're very, very important. And what else do the logs do? Well, what's amazing is a few years later, starting a couple years ago, we started to get pleurotus and turkey tail and other types of mushrooms growing out of those logs. So they fed us as well, which is really, really nice. But the important thing is they were attracting those frogs and toads, because you wouldn't believe how much those frogs and toads help. And then inside the garden, we put up vertical stuff like teepees, using 3 or 4 branches. We'd make teepees for our 3 sisters, for our corn and our beans, but we'd also make them for certain types of squash, cucumber, etc., that can climb up. Other trellising material, anything vertical that a bird could come and safely perch on, close to the other plants in the garden, to see what's going on, and then to come and eat all the insects. Especially, when I'm not in the garden and I'm looking at it from far away, I can see the garden is full of birds, which is really nice. When I'm in there, obviously, there are not as many, but many of them don't see me as a threat and will come even while I'm there. So that's really, really nice. So vertical items and also logs to attract the frogs and toads. Something else we did was we put a rain garden right next to our main garden. Now, that wasn't difficult to do because it was a wet spot. And it was a wet spot that we initially wanted to use for the garden, but because it was so wet, we thought, well, the garden will be beside it instead of there, and we made it into a rain garden. Now, you can make a rain garden without having a spot that's already wet by digging and lining and that kind of thing. We didn't need to do that. And I've got videos about that rain garden, but basically it's a garden where it was naturally wet, where water naturally drained into there. We helped it along the way by digging a little bit and making it look nice, and planting all sorts of species that like it wet. Because what was it in the entire space where that big 1/10 of an acre garden was just grass when we first moved in, and not very healthy grass, especially because of the wet spot. And in that wet spot, we put things like elderberry and all sorts of different native fruit and native wildflowers to attract the wildlife. And so and it's the first thing we did. We had stuff growing in there before we even had stuff growing in our vegetable garden, in our main garden. And what happened when we planted all that stuff? Well, animals started to come and they started to plant stuff for us. In that first year, we didn't have any wild grape, we didn't have any wild black raspberries and other types of berries like that. And we didn't actually plant any of that stuff, but the wild animals planted it for us. We have, in fact, surrounding 3/4 of our main garden right now, we have wild grape growing there, and we didn't plant one of them. And yet we filled our chest freezer halfway full with wild grape, and the other half with elderberry, the elderberry that we planted in that rain garden beside the garden. And because elderberry likes it wet. So that rain garden provides year-round shelter for the frogs. Obviously now in the wintertime they're not active, but they're in the mud under that rain garden. And as soon as the spring thaw comes, they're going to be out and they're going to be active and they're going to be eating the insects because they live there all winter. And so it's a real help. It's right next to the garden. We even have turtles that live on our property. We only see them twice a year. We have very, very large snapping turtles, and we also have eastern painted turtles. And we only see, like I said, we only see them twice a year. We see them in the spring when they come out of their late spring when they come out of their winter. It's not the right word, dormancy. There's another word for it. But when they come out of that in the spring and they leave and they go to the creek and they basically go to wherever they like to go in the summer. And then in the fall, when it's time for them to get ready for their winter sleep, then we see them coming back to the same places that they basically spend the winter. So basically, this is their safe place to sleep in the wintertime, which really gives me a special feeling, especially because turtles can live for decades, if not centuries. And the fact that they come here to sleep because they know it's safe here. They know they've got a place that they can call home. Gives me a really special feeling. And all those other animals I've mentioned too, and I'm just getting started. So let's continue. So let's talk about the deer and what I said about what we do so that even our gardens that aren't protected by fences, because most of them aren't, basically all the small ones, and none of them are protected with fences. And we have deer here all the time. We see their droppings, etc. We see their tracks. We don't see them very often. We do see them sometimes, but they're around. Actually, I think Magali sees them more often. She gets up earlier in the morning than I do. But I don't see them much during the day. But you see, we give those deer a lot to eat. What we do is we plant far away from the gardens, like basically in the opposite end of the property. I plant the Three Sisters in three places far away from the garden, and they're completely they're basically open to deer. They do have fencing around one of them, but the deer can easily get through that fencing, and I just don't want rabbits in one of them. But 2 out of the 3 don't have any fencing around them, and basically the deer eat the corn out of there and some of the bean leaves and some of the beans, and but the thing is, we still get a corn harvest because out of those ones, because when the deer get the corn, it's when the corn is still green and sweet and juicy and so on. So the plant, the corn hasn't dried, it hasn't matured enough. And so when they eat that, the plant is still alive and the plant realizes it hasn't set seed yet. And so it puts out another flush of corn. Usually the second flush are smaller cobs, but they're just as good and just as viable, and they give just as good seed as well because they have the same genetics. And in fact, the genetics set by that second flush of corn will probably have something in them that's ready to react to deer because they will have set those cobs after the deer foraging. The thing is, and this is something you need to know about corn, it's a real magnet. We used to grow corn in our main garden, but it was a real attractor of raccoons. And raccoons, unlike deer, make a real mess. And I'd like to talk about when, you get real messes and when, we've never had animals take all our harvest. But I have had people comment that they get really angry and frustrated and so on because the animals took everything. What I have to say about that, though, is that will often happen in places like in a big city, or outside of the city in places where basically there's no habitat for animals. In many big cities, they haven't planned to give habitat for animals. Like I spent many years in Toronto, and Toronto is crisscrossed with a ravine system where there's lots and lots of space for wildlife and for people to go and basically have parkland. You could cross the city without ever actually seeing the city and be along creeks and rivers and so on and surrounded by green space. It's really nice. But many cities don't have that. And so the wild animals that do exist, because they are attracted to human garbage and so on, which provides food, so then they're attracted to the gardens, which are even more attractive than the garbage. And if they don't have their wild food, well, then that's what they're going to go for. And that's when people get a lot of their harvests foraged. But you see, animals will only eat food out of the garden when they have no other choices. Because animals, native, wild animals, like deer and other animals, will prefer what grows naturally for them, what the native fruit, the native leaves. For example, the deer, they love maple leaves, they love basswood leaves, they love all sorts of different native plants and fruit and so on. They love our nanny berries, they love our high bush cranberries. We plant them everywhere because we could never harvest everything, but they're there also for the deer. And the thing is, when you put stuff out for the deer somewhere else, far from the garden, that's what they're going to take. And not only that, and I'm not the only, what I'm about to say, I'm not the only person who's observed it. I've got some subscribers on here who talk about this as well. The deer, and most likely the other animals, see when you've put stuff out for them. They watch you. They watch you when you have no idea they're watching you. They see when you set stuff out for them, food and so on, or you plant stuff for them and you make it available and you're not chasing them away, and they appreciate that. One subscriber in particular spoke about the fact that he observed a mother deer scolding her baby deer for going into his garden and basically making a mess. And she saw that deer chasing those baby deer out. Why? Because this particular person had a other place for the deer that he generously fed those deer and so on. And so the mother deer was basically helping him along, which is really, really nice. The animals are a lot smarter than most humans give them credit for. Way smarter, way more adaptable, way more social, way more cooperative than most humans give them credit for. Sure, they eat some of our food, and we don't mind. It's a small percentage. You know what? But when you think of it, I mean, this land really belongs to nobody. It belongs to nature. It belongs to creation. It belongs to nature. It belongs to all life. And so if they take some of the harvest, well, it's theirs to take. And when you think about it, if I were to expend all of the effort I could think of to make sure I'm trapping every single animal, that I'm using all sorts of garbage to keep pests away and so on, the effort, the money, the time that I'm going to spend is going to go way beyond any extra harvest I get. Way, way, way beyond any extra harvest I get. I prefer to leave it all up to nature. And then what's going to happen? And here's the most important part that I'm just starting to get to. When you leave it up to nature, when you leave it up to biodiversity, what are you going to get? You might get some of your stuff foraged, but what you're going to get is better food that's healthier for you. It's healthier for the environment, but it's also healthier for you. Each piece of fruit, each vegetable, each herb, each medicinal plant, each grain is going to feed you and is going to be so much more dense in nutrients. It will way outweigh anything that you could possibly get by expending all the efforts to keep the pests out, the animals out, using things like pesticides, fertilizers, traps, and all the rest of it. You're going to get a much more diverse diet, and you're going to get a much healthier diet, a much more flavorful diet, and a much more interesting bunch of fruit and vegetables. They might not look like the gigantic Frankenstein vegetables that you see in the grocery store, but you don't want that. You want real stuff. The grocery store will often give people this false sense of expectation about what their vegetables should look like. You don't need gigantic vegetables. You need healthy vegetables and abundant vegetables, which you will get if you use, and here's the key. Here is the key, and I'll say it again. Here is the key. Biodiversity. That is the key. Biodiversity is basically companion planting writ large. It's nature's companion planting. In fact, companion planting was basically thought of from people observing how nature works. Companion planting is when you got, let's say 2 different plants. Carrots and tomatoes are a famous one. They like each other. They help each other out in different ways. Carrots will repel pests of tomatoes. Tomatoes will repel pests of carrots. Apparently, there's also a chemical that one of those plants exudes that the other plant likes. But there's so many other different ways that companion planting works. It could be because one plant protects the other plants because of its thorns. It could be that one plant gives shade that another plant needs, etc. There are many, 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 many ways that companion planting works. And with biodiversity, you just multiply that exponentially 1,000,000 times. It works in as many ways as there are species out there. In our main garden, we grow probably at least 100, if not 200 different types of vegetables, herbs, grains, fruit, and so on. But then we've got about a further 100 other different species in and surrounding the garden. So we're talking hundreds and hundreds of species, and the effects of that on the garden are exponential. What happens? Well, first of all, what I just described, different plants will help other plants in many, many ways. But also, let's compare a monoculture. So you've got this gigantic field, 1 acre or 100 acres or 1,000 acres of one thing. Well, you got a pest that likes that one thing. It's got a smorgasbord in front of it. Whereas you've got, whether it's 1 acre, 1,000 acres, or it's just 100 square feet or 10 square feet, you got all sorts of different species in there. All sorts of different species mixed up in there. And you got an insect that likes one of them. You got an insect that likes your peppers. Well, if those peppers are surrounded by sunflowers and they're surrounded by calendula and sage and lavender, and they're surrounded by lettuce or dill or whatever, they're surrounded by all sorts of other plants, and everything's all interplanted. The pest isn't going to be able to go from plant to plant to plant. And the pest is going to be confused. It's like going to say, I think I smell peppers around here. Where are they? Where are they? Where are they? But other stronger smelling plants will be close by that will distract that pest. And, and I don't even like to use the word pest because I love all animals. But whatever. I use it for clarity and to make a point. Because those pests are just living beings, just like us humans, just like other animals, just like other insects, birds, fungus, whatever. All living things like to find food. And the easier it is to find, the better. Just like we like to find things easily, just like that's why, fast food and junk food and all the rest of it, people are attracted to it even though it's not healthy. Why are we attracted to it? Because it's full of fat and sugar, which instinctively our body thinks it needs because we spent most of our existence not having much of that or having to expend so much energy to get it by hunting large animals, like I'm talking thousands of years ago and so on, and sugar, etc. So we're attracted to it. Well, animals too. Animals like it easy. So if you make it challenging for them, they're going to say, I'm going to go look somewhere else. This is crazy. I want a pepper, and all I'm finding is sage or lavender or calendula or marigold. I can't find the pepper. Where's that pepper? Where's that pepper? I want that pepper. And if it's a spicy pepper, forget it. Oh my goodness, I finally found the pepper and it's too spicy. That's what's going to happen. That's what's going to happen. Biodiversity. And it really, really, really works. All right, let's look at my notes to see if I've said, okay. Other gardens, deer appreciate. Yes. Let's go back to the deer. I've had lots of people talk about the fact that Oh man, it drives them crazy because the deer forage their trees. You know, they plant a young tree, and the deer come and eat it down. Well, if you've planted a native fruit tree or any kind of native tree or shrub, you know, that's not on a, what's it called, it hasn't been grafted. It's just the tree is the same as what the roots are. It's all one plant. A deer forages that young tree is going to bounce right back. And in fact, that young tree is going to develop a stronger base trunk because it will have been foraged a couple times. Because any tree, you know, like some people make the mistake of planting their fruit trees or whatever, and they'll water it and fertilize it and do all sorts of stuff, and it's going to grow fast. Get all sorts of fruit on it and so on, and get all these branches up above, and it's going to have this weak central trunk. And they wonder why, you know, on a windy let's say, you know, season that there was a lot of wind or too much snow or whatever, the tree falls over and breaks. You know, an ice storm or whatever. Well, that's why. But when the deer forage those trees are going to develop a stronger stem. And sometimes they're going to forage shrubs, and those shrubs are going to develop more stems, which is better. Think of the pawpaw. The pawpaw, it's better, especially if you plant more than one. Let's say you sow 2 seeds of pawpaw or 3, you're going to have a better chance of pollination. You're going to have all sorts of, you know, branches growing together. That's fine. Each one will have less fruit than it would have had if it was all alone. But together, those 3 little separate pawpaws will have more fruit than the one would have had all alone. The fruit might be a bit smaller, but it'll definitely get more because they will get pollinated. Same thing happens with any type of shrub when it has more branches. Shrubs like to have lots of branches, and deer will help develop that. I've got it right behind me, actually. Well, it's right back there. There's an eastern redbud that got basically chewed down to the ground its first 3 years. And now it's almost my height. Sure, it's 6 years old. No, it'll be 6 years old this summer. So at my height, it's pretty small for 6 years old. But it's not only small because it got chewed down. It's small because it's in the shade of this big, huge white pine here and the Scots pines in the neighbor's lot beside. And but they tolerate shade. But the thing is about shade-tolerant species is they don't grow as big as when they have full sun, if that's what they like too. And that's okay. I'm patient. Look at me. I'm not 20 years old. I'm not 18 years old. I'm not 25 years old. I'm not 30 years old. But I have patience. I don't mind waiting. It'll come. It'll come. I don't know when I'm going to die. You know, I could die tomorrow. Even if I were 25, I could still die tomorrow. I'll be patient. I'll wait. When the time comes for, you know, eastern redbud's not a very good example. It's not something we harvest a lot of stuff off of, but any of the fruit trees. You know, I'm growing pawpaw. I now have probably a couple hundred pawpaw here. They take a good 7 years before they get any fruit. That's fine. I'll wait. Hope I'm still here when they fruit. If I'm not, well, I'm not. I got called home, you might say. All right? Or called to the next experience. Whatever. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Planting a seed is an act of faith. Planting a seed is an act of faith in tomorrow. I think I'm speaking in French here. Planting a seed is a leap of faith. Planting a seed is declaring that you believe in tomorrow. Planting a tree, or whatever you want to call it. Often they use the word tree. Planting a tree is declaring that you have faith in tomorrow, that you have faith in the future. And when we have faith, when we believe, that's when we can do anything. When you believe, that is when you can do anything. When you believe in yourself, when you believe in life, when you believe in the world, when you believe that we are here for good reason. And you are here for good reason when you believe that right in your heart. Anything's possible. You just have to know what you want and visualize it and plan it, and what you need will come. For me, that's planting a seed. For you, it might be something else. But I have never been able to stop planting seeds. It's crazy. But not just planting seeds, taking branches and planting those too. Anything. And anytime I see something new, wow, what is that? What does it do? Is it something I can eat? Is it medicine, or does it help the environment? Whatever. That's why I always have too much stuff growing in the garden, because I like to let everything grow, which is a whole other subject, letting the weeds grow. Watch my video about use the weeds, Anyway, let's see if I've covered everything. 4-foot fence, other gardens exposed, attract frogs and toads, logs, rain garden, water. Hold on. Yeah, okay. Let's talk about cats and raccoons. Yeah, and I've talked about the main strategy, which is biodiversity. Before I get into cats and raccoons, let me just underline something. So basically, I've spoken about how we've surrounded our main garden, but that most of our gardens aren't surrounded. Basically, it's the plants that do the heaviest workload of protecting each other, and that's through biodiversity. You see, because basically when you got a huge amount of biodiversity, what people like to call pests, which I just call foraging animals, they're no longer pests. They're just one element amongst many, 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 many others. And so whatever they take, it will be small and insignificant in the long view. And what they leave will be a healthier garden. In fact, I want to talk about our wild grapes. The wild grapes started to grow about a year and a half after we moved in, because the wild animals planted them. So we started to see them in 2021. Fall of 2021, we started to see the plants growing and so on, probably summer 2021. And then they started to get flowers on them and so on. The first year, they didn't do much. The second year, they had flowers. We saw little grapes starting to grow in 2022 and 2023. But then in those 2 years, 2022, 2023, the grapes would start to grow, and then they'd all shrivel up because of some kind of fungus. And Maggie was really worried about that. She said, what are we going to do about that fungus? What are we going to do about that fungus? Which is a lot about what a lot of people ask me about. I've had thousands of questions. What do you do about this? What do you do about that? What do you do about this? What do you do about that? And my answer is almost always the same. And in this case, I said about that fungus, basically we're doing away with all the grape harvest. I said, it's there for a reason. These are young plants. They're just establishing themselves. That fungus most likely, it originated in the soil, and it's most likely establishing itself in the soil, and it most likely has a symbiotic relationship with those grapes that it's eating, because it requires the grapes, and if it doesn't have the grapes, it's not going to survive, so it wants those grapes to survive. But if the grapes don't produce grapes successfully, eventually the grapes won't survive, and so nor will the fungus. Which means eventually those grapevines will have grapes we can harvest. Which is, of course, what happened. 2024 and 2025, we harvested enough grapes to fill half of a chest freezer. And that's just one example of thousands. Remember it. What do you do about? I let nature take care of it. Most of the time. Sometimes I do something else. let's talk about cats and raccoons. Cats are one of those emotional subjects. People either love them or they hate them. I love cats. I've always loved cats, even before I was a gardener. Now, I didn't have my first cat until I was a young adult, until I was in university. We didn't have pets when I was a kid. But the first time I had a cat, I knew I loved him. And I didn't have the cat because I was a gardener. In fact, when I first got that cat, I didn't even have a garden at the time. I didn't think I was a good gardener. I just loved cats. Cats are calming. And cats have been with humans for thousands of years. I don't know if they've been with humans for as long as dogs have, but probably close to it. Well, when we came here, I've always had this dance I've had to do with mice. And when we came here, it was nothing new. There were mice. And I thought, oh my goodness, we want to grow our own food. We can't have mice. At least not inside the house. And so we got cats. We got 2 cats. They're rescues. A friend of ours gave them, a colleague gave me these 2 cats. And one of them proceeded to have kittens, which also proceeded to have kittens. And so right now we have 5 cats. They're all fixed though, our 5 cats. And the 2 oldest ones are the daughters of one of the 2 first cats we got. Yin and Yang were the 2 first cats we got, even though they were both female, but I called them Yin and Yang because that's what they looked like when they were babies. Curled up together. One was black, the other was white. They were sisters. And Yang had kittens. And she had 3 kittens. No, she had eventually 4, but 2 of them basically left us. You see, because our cats are basically, they're outside all the time. Sometimes they'll take off for a week at a time. And so they're hunted just like all the others. Yes, they hunt. Yes, they sometimes will take birds, but they mostly prefer mice. Sometimes they'll take moles too, which drives me crazy because they don't eat them. They hunt them and they don't eat them. I don't mind having moles in the garden because they loosen up the soil and they don't eat the vegetables. And the birds, well, they just have to adapt. And birds have been adapting to cats for thousands of years. They'll continue to adapt to them. We have tons and tons and tons of birds. We probably have at least 80 species, and I don't know all the names by heart. But we have lots of them, and yes, the cats eat some of them. But that's nature. Our cats get eaten too. Yin one time came back from being missing for 3 weeks, and she had a hole through her throat from one end to the other. She eventually healed. She obviously had been picked up by some kind of predator bird and carried far away. Somehow she managed to survive because Yin was a real fierce cat. She probably forced her way out of those claws and fell down somewhere and nursed herself back to health, and 3 weeks later came home. She still needed to be nursed back to health. I nursed her back to health with using aloe and yarrow and sage, surrounding her neck with it, and it helped heal it. Anyway, the cats help us keep the mice out of our garage, because at first the mice would be eating away at our potatoes and eating away at our grains, and we didn't want that. So the cats basically, I haven't seen a mouse in the house or in the garage in at least 2 years, which is really, really nice. Because there's so much food for the mice that if we didn't have the cats, we'd be overrun with them, mice and other rodents. Well, I still see them in the gardens and so on, but the cats basically keep them busy. And the cats also keep the squirrels and the chipmunks busy and wary. We do have squirrels that take some of our stuff, and chipmunks, but the cats basically have to keep them on their toes, and they keep the rabbits on their toes too. So even though I see them, and even though they take stuff, if we didn't have the cats, we'd be overrun by all that stuff. And I also make sure that anytime I find walnuts, I'm throwing those all over the place for the squirrels, because they love walnuts. And something else that I have growing all through the garden, I planted them in the first year, sunflowers. I didn't harvest them. I let the animals harvest them. And now we have sunflowers all over the place, and they keep those squirrels busy. The squirrels just love them. They're like gold to those squirrels, and so I'd rather they eat the sunflowers, and we get to harvest some of them too. We let the animals harvest most of the sunflowers, but we harvest some of them, and so it's really, really nice. They're there for them. They're beautiful. They're impressive. They're there for the animals. We harvest some, and they keep the animals entertained, which is great. So that's the cats. The other thing I want to mention, and this is going to be the least popular thing that I'm going to mention. Some people aren't going to be happy about what I'm about to say, but, you know, it's important not to be a purist or a fundamentalist or say, never, 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 never do something, because, you know what? Life is complex, and nobody's perfect. No situation is perfect, and not even the situation, the methods, the strategies I'm talking to you about, they're not perfect. And so there is one animal that we trap, and it's the raccoon. We'll trap it, but we won't kill it. We use a trap called Have a Heart, and it basically traps them alive. But we think about those raccoons, because I actually love raccoons. I think they're fascinating, they're funny, they're very family oriented. You always see them in big families. They're beautiful. The raccoons around here are extremely well fed. And what happens is we always get them every July. We get the raccoons. They're mostly attracted to the corn. That's why we don't put them in our main garden anymore, because man, can raccoons make a mess. They can make a huge mess. Last year they made a mess in our raspberries. Not as big of a mess that they used to make with our corn. So that's why we put the corn way out back and let them eat it out there. Although the way we set up with the corn, with the teepees and the three sisters and the beans, well, the beans which grow on the teepees and attach themselves to the corn help keep that corn standing, even when a raccoon will grab one of those cobs. The raccoon will grab the cob, but the corn will stay standing. If you don't have those teepees and it's just a freestanding corn, that raccoon's going to knock the plant completely down, and then there's no chance of you getting more corn off that plant if the raccoon will have basically pulled it down. So yeah, raccoons can tend to make a huge mess. However, this is what we do, and so listen carefully for those people who basically think it's cruel that we trap them and move them, because that's what people will say. You can't move them too far and that kind of the rest of it. We trap them and, separating families and all the rest of it. So this is how we do it. We set those. We actually have two traps that we use. So sometimes we'll trap two raccoons at the same time. Very often, actually. We trap the raccoons. We put peanut butter inside the cage. They find peanut butter irresistible. And then we'll take those trapped raccoons as soon as possible when we've found them, and we'll take them to a local conservation area, where a large conservation area, not something that's just like an acre big. No, something that's big, something where they can spread out and, whatever. They can have a life there, and we'll put them there. A few kilometers away. They say there's a certain number of kilometers that you have to do it so that, there's no chance they come back. But then other people will say if you put them too far away, they can't adapt. Well, the thing is, we'll put that trap out because raccoons work in families. So the first time we trap a raccoon, the next night, we'll put that trap back out. The next day, there will be more raccoons in those traps. And the next day after that, there'll be more. And the next day after that, there'll be more. It can go right up to a dozen. A couple of years, we trapped a dozen over about a week and a half. And we'll take them all to exactly the same place to get that family back together. Now, you might think, how do I know? Well, you might think, what? How do I know that family's back together? I don't. But watching the raccoons, I think I have put the family back together. Why? Well, let me tell you something. Take a couple more minutes with this story. One year, that year that we had a dozen raccoons in about a week, what happened? The first raccoon we trapped, it was this very, very young raccoon, which looked really curious, and inside the cage, it just wanted to interact with us, and it was curious about us, and so on. It was like, wow. It was like saying, wow. And we trapped it. and we brought it to the conservation area. The next day, there was a much bigger raccoon in there, and it was not in a good mood. Took that, brought it to the same place. And then over the next several days, we got all sorts of raccoons in all sorts of different sizes and different temperaments. Some were curious, some were angry, some were scared, but we took them all to the same place. And then the last day, we trapped 2 raccoons. One was the biggest one, and the other was the smallest one. In the middle there somewhere was a time when we trapped 2 raccoons inside the same little trap. They went in together. Because some of those raccoons figured out if they stood in the doorway of the trap, they could hold it open while the other one ate the peanut butter. But then, the peanut butter is too irresistible. So others would have just continued on and said, no, I want some of that peanut butter. And then they were both trapped. But let me get back to this 12th day. Or this 12th raccoon. That last day, the biggest raccoon, and this was a calm one, very calm, just watching us, and then the smallest raccoon in the trap next to her. Now, I'm thinking that biggest raccoon, that was the mom. And that smallest raccoon, that was the youngest baby. And so what I think happened was that very first raccoon we got, that was the most curious one and the one that made the mistake of getting trapped. And when that happened, Mom said, we got to keep the family together. We got to find that raccoon that got trapped. Well, the best way to find it, we need to get all ourselves trapped. So what happened the next day? She sent Pop in there or the biggest brother or the biggest sister into the trap. That was the angry one saying, I don't want to be here, but Mom made me be here. And so that one was sent to go find the first one that was trapped. And then Mom went and sent all the others into the traps. You're all joining your brothers and sisters. Go on. And then when everybody was gone, that's when Mom said, okay, now that I know everybody's gone, now I'm going with the baby. Is that what really happened? I have no idea. But that's what I like to believe. Some of you will say that it's very cruel. The raccoons won't survive in that new place. But people, I'm going to be very honest right now. I don't believe that for a second. And people who believe that, I think they're people who don't know enough about how nature really works. I said it earlier in the video, I'll say it again. Animals are much, 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 I could say it 1,000 times, much more intelligent than humans give them credit for. They think, they feel, they recognize. I could go on. And they can adapt. And especially raccoons. Raccoons with their 5 fingers. Raccoon, the word raccoon means, actually I don't know what the word raccoon means, but I know that the word for raccoon in many languages means animal that washes its food. Like in French, raton laveur. That means big mouse washer because it washes its food. Raton is like a big mouse, and then laveur means washer, washes its food. Raccoons are incredible. Anybody who sees raccoons in the city sees how they're incredible, how they manage to get into all sorts of places that are meant to be raccoon-proof. Very, very intelligent animals. And so I'm not worried about those raccoons. But call me cruel. It's the one animal that we trap every year. I think I've got some images. I'll show them to you. But I love them, and that's why I wanted to share that story with you. Let me see. Goodness. Let me see. Talked about the grapes. Plants attracting. Ah, yes. You know, I was talking about, you know, the plants and how they help each other. They're not only plants that will repel pests of other plants, but they're also plants that will attract, you know, like plants that will, certain pollinators and certain, like, you know, carrots and dill and stuff, they'll attract the predator insects that eat other insects. So it's not only the logs that attract the frogs and the teepees that attract the birds, but the plants that attract the parasitic wasps and the other predator insects that will eat some of the insects in our garden. You know. So basically, this video has been about how we grow all our food surrounded by animals and nature. And we welcome animals and nature into our gardens with joy. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something from it. I hope it was useful. Please don't hesitate to ask a question if you have any. You know I answer them all, or give a comment. Share things that you've learned about nature and how all this works, because I'm learning every day. You know, the day I stop learning is the day my heart stops beating. So I learn a lot from all of you. So please share your comments or your questions. And even though I haven't really talked about any plants in specific, if in any of our videos there are plants that you'd like to grow, well, then we most likely have seeds for those plants in our seed catalog. So that's one way that you can support us. You can check out our website. You can check out our seed catalog. There are seeds that we grow here from our own vegetables. We collect ourselves. We dry ourselves. Everything is done ourselves. And we sell those seeds now. And so it's a really nice positive way that you can support us, and you can also help increase biodiversity. Now we sell all kinds of stuff, not just vegetables and herbs and fruit. We also sell native plants, native trees, native medicinals, and all sorts of other stuff too. And eventually there'll be all sorts of categories like shade tolerant or likes wet spots and so on and so forth. We're working on that. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for being here with us. Have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time.